Jobless Reincarnation has a nearly perfect formula. It has excellent character development, gigantic worlds that are well built, and pacing that keeps you interested. And all of this is only tainted by a handful of perverted moments that take things a little bit too far. Just to give a quick summary, Jobless Reincarnation focuses on its protagonist Rudy in both his former life as a 200-pound, 34-year-old otaku, as well as this new life he has after he sacrifices himself for some teenagers. Now, in his old life, we're told he was bullied, ostracized, wasn't that well connected with his family, and on top of that, mostly what he did was read manga, play video games, masturbate, and eat. So, him sacrificing himself to save those teenagers, you could say as much as it was him trying to do something altruistic, it was also him trying to like end things potentially. Yeah, maybe. But what matters is when he sees that bright light, that's not the end of his life, but rather he gets reborn and he comes into this new world filled with dragons, demons, all types of beings, and he is born into this rather safe environment to parent Zenith and Paul. But even though he's reborn, he still is 34 years old in his mind. So while he has a brand new body, he has his old mind. And given that, he tries his best to take this new life as an opportunity to start over, which means him trying to develop healthy, loving relationships, being curious about the world he lives in, and developing skills that he never was able to because he just didn't have a secure environment to do so, which ultimately makes season one into what feels like an origin story, someone who could potentially change the world. When it comes to highlights, there are a few that we want to go over. The first one is how it consistently maintains your interest in the characters and the world they're in. For usually when it comes to live action or animated shows, you either get world building or character building, rarely both. In Jobless Reincarnation, you pretty much get it all. In terms of world building, from details about magic ranks, languages spoken, what age someone is seen as adult, and presenting us with three distinct locations, all with their own culture and history, it is made clear these characters live in these worlds and the worlds aren't solely about the characters. Yet, even with saying that, each of these characters are made to be appreciated. Rarely, if ever, someone introduced feels expendable or like their purpose is just to give us some filler. But whether it's Roxy, who acts as a changing agent to help Ruby break free from the shackles of his past, Eris, who challenges Ruby to stick up to people and stick up for himself, especially when they're more aggressive or violent than him, or even characters like Paul, who add layers which make it difficult to hate or love him. Whether as individuals or relation to really each character you almost fall for in ways that for most shows is very difficult to do, especially as quickly as you do on Jobless Reincarnation. Yet, as you know, with Rudy as lead, it is made clear he can't stay in one location forever, especially with the way this show is made. And so he moves place to place. He keeps the show interesting and the pace to go well. And just to show you that these characters matter, every few episodes, the show checks in on Roxy, checks in on Zenith and Paul, and makes it clear while these are the people who molded Rudy, at the same time, these are people who have their own lives that continue whether he was around or not. And you deserve, as a fan of the show, to have an idea of what's going on, even after Rudy isn't reliant on them and what lessons they can teach him. And speaking of Rudy's relationships and the lessons taught by these people, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the way the show is that it has a certain formula that it adheres to that could work for any of the characters, but for Rudy specifically, it's just Ace. For as you take note of how he was bullied or ostracized in his first life, it makes Rocky, Roxy breaking him out of the fear all the more memorable and enhances both characters. It makes Roxy into this almost that like ideal teacher that you had when you was a kid that kind of helped form who you are. But at the same time, it also when you watch Rudy start to get curious about the world outside of the little protective cocoon that Zenith and Paul made for him, it makes what you see all the more sweeter, almost to the point where you could get a little emotional, depending upon if you're like me or not. But that aside, what another relationship we also feel like we have to note is how Rudy and Paul interact. Mainly because the way that we've shown Rudy in the past, it seems like he really did not have much, if any, relationship with his family. So him bonding with Paul and bonding with Zenith, I don't know if that's the first time he's ever bonded and had this sense of family or not, but there is this vibe that he's experiencing a lot of things for the first time. And while he's not like dumbfounded by every single experience, it is treated as something special. And it makes it where even though Paul and Rudy may be the same age, if you count Rudy's mental age with Paul's physical, as he allows Paul to play the role of a father and he allows him to have a purpose beyond trying to teach him swordplay and follow his footsteps, it makes for this relationship that I guess the best way to say it is the way that Paul has introduced us, he's been a fuck most of his life, and this is his one chance to kind of compensate for that. And with Rudy not really needing him for most of it, it's kind of, you can see it's heartbreaking for him. So when Paul gets the chance to actually play the father and Rudy allows him to do that, it shows that as much as Rudy may not have had much relationships, platonic, family, or otherwise in the past, he's not completely oblivious to how to form one, maintain one, and even develop one. And that even translates to how he treats Eris, somebody who clearly is used to getting away and is very violent and probably, if it wasn't for what Roxy pulled out of, could probably be triggering. Yet, despite how violent Eris can be, you can see he's very patient with her. He learns how to gain her trust, granted through manipulation. And there's even like a love that gets built between them, which granted many times Rudy kind of takes advantage of, if not crosses the line with. But if you find yourself able to set aside this 30, technically 40 plus year old man by the time he gets around Eris, and the fact that she trusts him so much, like, for example, when it comes to Eris, one of the things that the show goes into to show that she has a whole thing going on is that her brothers were taken away at an early age. So when it comes to Rudy, even though physically he's younger than her, because he's smarter, because he's more patient, because just with more mature, you can kind of see like a brother and sister relationship there, and one where she looks up to him despite being older than him, which of course gives her a bit of a complex early on that he's so smart and she's older and it's like things aren't like level as they should be. But as she learns to trust him and depend on him even, you see this beautiful relationship that unfortunately gets tainted because, well, Rudy is a pervert. Which leads to the blemish of the show, which is trying to reconcile that Rudy starts off as somebody with a 34-year-old mind. By the end of the show, he should be somewhere in his 40s. And one of the things that he does is, like any show of ecchi that's focused on a young man coming of age, there's a lot of ogling, listening to people having sex, panty shots through underwear, but then it takes things a bit too far in episode 6, where you see pretty much Rudy's assaulting his cousin sleeping. He fondles her, he tries to take off her panties, but he gets knocked the fuck out. And then even in episode 8, when he's physically 10, but at that point, let's say 44, he's trying to have sexual relations with Eris. So you got the fact of Rudy and Eris being cousins. Then on top of that, you have the fact that Rudy, in his mind, is basically 44. Eris is about 10, and that situation just making it so it's very hard to not get uncomfortable. And as much as you are told that, Rudy's 10 years old, it's like, even though the show doesn't remind you that, hey, he's 44 at this point, it's very hard to not put the two together and be like, how is this not creepy to Rudy at all? But technically, that's not the only problem. That's the main one, at least for us. But another issue that you may have with the show is that there's not any real threat. Throughout the whole first season, there is no villain, there's no adversary. It's just mainly Rudy dealing with his insecurities or the challenges of him getting adjusted to the various places he goes to. That is a central conflict, and that is why there's changes in location, the pacing that the show has, the world building, and all that, because it seems to be made to compensate so that for every time Rudy uses a new spell or meets a new person who's a bit erratic or kind of crazy, like Eris, it's so that the show never kind of slips into a slice of like dullness and that it keeps you watching, it keeps you entertained. But despite feeling very uncomfortable with episode 6 and 8 with how Rudy treats Eris, overall, it's hard to not appreciate what this show is trying to do. For us, something that's basically an 11 episode origin story that doesn't really go that far. At the same time, it does so much in creating an emotional attachment to characters. It builds this world that has so many details to it that most shows don't really put into their programs. And when it comes to Rudy's friends, family, himself, the world, and just everything we're offered, truly, if it wasn't for the fact that Rudy assaults his physic- physically older but mentally younger cousin, this show would basically be perfect in our eyes.